Hello again, folks. This is Lights, Camera, Accolade, and you are about to listen to a preview of our second Black History Month special episode. As I just mentioned, this is just a short clip, but if you want to hear the whole darn thing, all you have to do is come over to patreon.com/lights, camera, accolade and become a supporter. Boy, won't you become a supporter already.
Back to Hallelujah, which I do think there's a good amount of stuff here to talk about.
Absolutely.
Especially, again, having watched Oscar Michaud's Within Our Gates, which was before this movie. Like, it's set somewhat in the same sort of region in that sort of Jim Crow era as well. But the characters in that movie, even when you do have some that are, like, I'm thinking of the one who still served the white family, and he was kind of like really minstrelly, kind of the fool type character. But then you had the preacher who seemed like he was that, but then you get a view into what he really thinks about it. And it's kind of like acknowledging that for his own comfort, you know, he's giving this message in his sermons to his congregation and kind of misleading them, right?
The characters within Our Gates have interior thoughts that they aren't necessarily like acting on. It's less impulsive. Yeah.
Right. And then, so here you do have humanization compared to obviously what we're seeing in the mainline podcast, where they're just side supporting roles and stuff. But you can tell that the mannerisms here are much more impacted by minstrelsism than Within Our Gates. So it's still like, it's white produced, and the studio had to give their thumbs up to making this movie. And I think with that, there were probably these caveats of how certain things could or should be portrayed, even though it's pre-Hays Code. I think it's still meant to be like palatable to a broad audience of moviegoers. And by broad in this case, it's like white audience goers, right? So that kind of stood out, even though there was a lot to enjoy, but particularly I didn't really like the way that they portrayed and framed Zeke's lustful nature right off the bat in that first scene where he sees Missy playing the piano, and the way that I'm sure that he has been directed with his facial expressions. It was way too similar to the silent movie that we watched for Women's History Month, the Suspense, where that's about like a woman's house getting broken into, and all of the shots of the man who was like breaking into the house had kind of that like leering element and like gaze. And I feel like they did that with Zeke a lot through this. And obviously it's like, this is Zeke's personal demon that he's fighting throughout this entire movie and stuff. But it just, what you take from that as an audience member about what it's saying about this person, who is also our main character, just left me feeling not great about it.
Yeah, like you don't see in San Francisco, where we've got a central character who is morally reprehensible in terms of like the movie is like this guy's terrible, but that's not how he's shot.
Also saved by religion.
Yeah, also saved by religion. But yeah, it's not how the camera treats him. So.
Exactly. Yeah, the camera in other movies where we have, because we've seen, you know, plenty of like, oh, this dude's a dog, or this guy's a terrible person or whatever, but you don't get the lens where the camera is making you view him with the same sort of fear or discomfort that other people might in the world, right?
It makes it like black male lust is like animalistic, is the subtext of it. And it's so interesting to watch all these movies together right now, because this one, actually, the more I think about it, reminds me of like House of the Rothschild, in that it feels like what King Vidor and the other filmmakers involved in this are saying is, yes, these stereotypes exist. Black people love and are great at music, are very hardworking when it comes to their labor, and very religiously oriented, maybe a little lustful, maybe they allow gambling and the vices to get the better of them, but ain't it really cute at the end of the day? And ain't it really cute and sweet that that's the way it is? And there's some nice things about that. It kind of felt like House of the Rothschild was doing the same thing with respect to stereotypes about Jewish people. So it almost feels like, from the thinking of the filmmakers at this time, for white audiences to be able to metabolize a story fully about a different group than them, they have to acknowledge and kind of play up those stereotypes, but try to emphasize their more positive aspects while still operating in the same framework of those stereotypes. So it's very interesting to watch, because you can tell that King Vidor, and you can tell he wants to do well and he wants to help uplift, but he's operating from this very narrow understanding. So I don't know. It's really gotten me think, this one.
Same. Like, I agree with what you're saying, but it's also interesting.
I'm going to record that.
Replay it as often as you need to. But I also, like, I'm thinking about other movies around the same time frame where you have, I wish I remembered the one where it's like pre-prohibition ending crime dramas where you have those like kind of gambling, the Racket, where you have a lot of similarities in how the gambling kind of elements or the crime elements are portrayed. And then I want to talk briefly about Nina Mae McKinney, who plays Chick in this. So that character trope, though, is something that we see a lot too for women in general in film, where it's like, oh, you had to go through this hard life and ended up in prostitution, and it kind of makes you jaded, but then usually there's some form of redemption. Or not, right? Like, depending. But that's redemption, a very common trope.
Kill you.
Or both. Or you're dead. Yeah, or both. And so, like, that's very common for women in general. So in a way, it's almost like it's nice to see commonality with some of the tropes that weren't just black tropes. They were also white tropes, female tropes. And I feel like this movie would be viewed so much differently with playing up any kind of stereotypes if, like, with white characters and white filmmaking, then you get so many different narratives and different stories told, because this would just be one facet of it. But this is so early in film that it almost wouldn't have mattered as much if film continued being able to, like, explore these societies and narratives and stories. But it ended up going the opposite direction. Right. And that has doubled down on it and has affected how now we look back at the few ones that we can look at examples of trying to, like, not be part of the mainstream narrative.
Not to continuously call you out over Kitty Foyle, Jake, but I did have the thought where I was like,
I lay awake at night, shattered by misinterpretation.
Well, I'm a very white person, but I had the thought of watching this. I was like, I wonder if, as a contemporary audience member of going to go see this movie when it came out, or like a Black American going to go see this movie and being forced to sit in the balcony of the premiere, did watching this was the experience like me as a woman watching Kitty Foyle being like, well, it's a woman-led movie, etc.
I think that, like anything else, you're going to have just a range of perspectives on that, even within the group. Because I did read that Daniel L. Haynes, who is the one who played Zeke in this movie, that he, even though there was some of that controversial depiction of Black Americans, and it was a movie that focused on some of the, like, seedier elements, that he thought really highly of the film. And he was quoted as saying, "I cannot say what our race owes King Vidor and Metro Goldwyn Mayer. There are not words forceful enough for that. Hallelujah will, as Moses led his people from the wilderness, lead ours from the wilderness of misunderstanding and apathy." So I think that he had really high hopes for, like, this is the first of many sort of films. Like, this opened the gates to being able to show humanization and understanding and characters. And I fully get that, because I'm sure watching this movie, you don't know that this is, like, one of the last movies before everyone just has to play a maid, sort of thing, right? So it would probably be more like this is just the beginning. It's not perfect, but what a huge accomplishment to have this movie come out from a major studio. Yeah. And Nina Mae McKinney was actually the first African-American to sign a contract with a major studio. Wow. So I'm sure it felt like this huge turning point. Yeah, and just wish that things had gone in the direction of, like, more opportunities and more roles and more visibility than the opposite. Because I know even though Nina Mae McKinney had signed that contract with MGM, they obviously didn't really glamorize her or advertise her like they did with white actresses, which made it difficult to really have a full career. She went to Europe for a bit, did some tours there, but pretty much had to return to the US eventually through financial difficulty, because she just wasn't getting the amount of work and stuff that she needed to. And then by that time, in the late 30s in Hollywood, we're fully Hays Code. So it's kind of just back to made characters, or with some exceptions, but mostly just supporting type things. And so seeing this as her debut, where it's kind of, the world should have been her oyster, just as much as so many of the other actresses we've seen, to know that because of the direction film took, it just fizzled out, is deeply frustrating.
I mean, we kind of talked about when watching the Mae West movie where she has the maid character, and that was an actor that she worked with frequently, and Mae West really like made room for African Americans to be in her movies and plays, and talked a little bit about the basic economics of how important it is to have roles for people, just in terms of like, yeah, there's diversity, one, on screen, but B, like you're actually employing someone, and that's not nothing. So like, to give King Vidor credit, there is something incredibly important about an all black cast. And I believe also there was like the production crew itself also had Black Americans working on it. So that's not nothing.
Right. Yeah.
And it must be acknowledged that, you know, while it's jarring for us, I think in the 21st century to watch such a stereotypical kind of setting and behavior among these Black characters, that for, I don't want to say a majority, but a large segment of the African American population in the country at that time, I do think there are a lot of very wholesome things to glom onto from those depictions, and that it was to some extent a very realistic reflection of a very rural, impoverished lifestyle in that region of the country that I'm sure resonated for a lot of people. You know, like, it's difficult this is where it's hard to go this far back in time, because it's such a different country now than it was then. And you're talking about a population, Black, white, Latino, immigrant, that was, like, in many cases largely illiterate, you know? So it's just, I'm saying there's some truth there, but go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's the thing that really gets it for me is the lack of second level interiority, where every single feeling that these people have is something that they are going to act on and express. Really like a kind of flat paternalism almost in terms of how these characters are being represented. That while I think that some of the cultural keystones in terms of like the juke bar and the Baptist church service out in the field, I think that kind of thing has a real root in reality. And even the performances, right? Because there are some really excellent performances in this from the main cast. The actual like writing and perception of the characters is very that's complete fiction.
Flat. And it was written also by King Vidor, who based some of it, like, he grew up in the South in like Texas mostly, but he had always wanted to make a movie that was an all African American cast because of his experience seeing a lot of the like spiritual music and stuff of those communities. But he was always, you know, on the outside looking in, or on the, right? Yeah. That's the term. On the outside looking in. And I think that also comes through in that writing. I think paternalism is a really good way to say it, because his observations were positive, right? But he didn't have that kind of viewpoint into who they were as people. I'm very glad that we watched Within Our Gates first, because it's like, you can see the like realism in the scenes, a lot of the community and events and different spaces that they had for themselves, but you're not seeing them as people the same way that you're seeing them in the other movie.
It's so deeply frustrating that as that cinematic technology advanced, it seems like a lot of those opportunities for Black told stories shrank, because they did not get to, like you said a few moments ago, get their foot in the door, shape those perceptions, and some of those more stereotypical ones got doubled down. Even if the intention is good, like in this case, it's almost like King Vidor is like the prototypical performative white lib, you know? Again, the phrase that kept going through my mind, like, ain't it cute? Although it must be said, the music in this movie I found to be quite delightful.
I really wanted to talk about the music.
To me, how accomplished this is for like an early sound film. Because it sounds pretty terrific.
Incredible. Yeah. Thank you, Douglas Shearer.
Yeah, seriously. The thing that struck me really about it is there's also a really great sense of like off-frame sound. So you see it a teeny tiny bit in All Quiet on the Western Front, where they're kind of using some of the problems with sound, right? And they mask that by kind of motivating it by rain or that kind of thing. But this feels like a very early example of sound is happening, but you're not just hearing the stuff that is happening on the screen. I'm thinking especially of like the funeral sequence where he's out in the field and you can hear everyone in the house off screen still singing. So it really blends that concept of, I'm hearing a person on screen talk, but also kind of gives you a little bit of a soundtrack too, which it feels like it took a long time to get there in a lot of the movies that we saw.
Yeah, this was just technically much better than a lot of the other movies from around this time that we watched.
It's crazy. The camera work in that bayou sequence, wild.
Yeah, that was so good, actually.
It was like a horror movie for a little bit.
Yeah, the lighting and the pacing. And then, as we talked about during it, as Jake mentioned, like Terminator style or Michael Myers, it's like, it's kind of interesting how far back that element of something or someone walking menacingly towards you while you frantically try to escape is so scary, you know? So it's just like, it's funny
I'm
to
gonna
see
be
it
honest,
far
like
back.
naming the movies that he did, like there's a lot of those in there, but I can't say that I think that any of them have a sequence as good as that sequence in them.
Yeah. No, that sequence, it like if in a vacuum, like if you just take that sequence out and compare it to other sequences from movies we've seen, like it's up there even with recent ones that are at this point, 10 plus years
from like
later.
The beginning of the like horse trap chase to the end. Wow, perfect.
Yeah.
Crazy.
That guy was a dick too. I'm glad he got what was coming to him.
I like to think that chick got up and walked away after that, like faked her death and was just like, you know what, let these men take each other out and I'm going to go somewhere else.
I'm committing that to like
from a
my
feminist
truth. Like,
perspective.
that's reality for me.
Yes, but chick definitely had some problems too. Let's be honest,
Yeah, she did, but I'm like, look, everyone's kind of problematic in this trio right here that we're seeing. So, and then I guess on that note, I don't know how I feel about the ending fully, because I think it ending with the chain gang feels realistic in a lot of ways, because it's just like, any excuse to get more labor into this form of essentially new slavery. But the redemption is kind of the point. Right. So him going home and having that whole sequence of welcoming and stuff was good. I think the thing that I didn't fully like about that was that the movie as a whole had that same mistake and then redemption, mistake and then redemption. So I'm just like, is it real this time? Like, is it actually, is he just going to break Missy Rose's heart again? Yeah, exactly. Which left it feeling just a little bit like nothing really had changed in his heart, so to speak. Yeah.
I must know, in 1929, at what point did people think that black men aged out of being like sexually violent? Because the dad is totally nice and fine. The kids are portrayed as very cute, but apparently like for white America, frankly now, and back then especially, like
super predators.
There's this, it really sucks to be a black man in the prime of your life, because that's when everyone's going to be scared of you. But if you can get to the point where you become an old black man, then you're okay again.
Yeah. I think that even just goes back to, unfortunately, it's much, much worse for black men and minorities, but men in general, it's that phrase of like military aged men, where it's like you are just inherently a threat. You see that a lot with like refugee circumstances, right? Where somehow saying it's not just women and children, it's military aged men. It's like, so they can't try to escape war either. They can't be refugees. Like they can't, So I think that exists, unfortunately, with men, but no, especially of course, black men, because black men in this time in America, and then like you're saying now, because there's the element of danger, but as we saw in this movie too, it's like this idea of sexual danger that is put on them, and that we know has very real consequences in the US.
When you look about the totality of sexual assault and abuse in this country, who the perpetrators were, race v. race. I mean, hello, there was that 300 or 400 year period where non-white women were property. What do you think was going on? But I was going to say, I think that the ending, like, if you look at it from the perspective of what Vidor is trying to do, it would have kind of been a Debbie Downer to have this golden opportunity in his and the cast members' mind to have a fully black story and have it end on like a real bad note, So I think that there's that impulse to have that closure, but it just plays into the deep sexism of the movie, which is kind of unavoidable. I mean, it's ubiquitous in this time period, but it's pronounced in this movie, I would say.
I don't mind the like happier redemption, returning home, wayward son ending. I just wish that we hadn't already seen him allegedly reform himself multiple times before that, only to not be the case, because then it just feels like, well, he's going to be back
starts
at
to
it.
be like, what's the actual story of this movie? Like, is it that faith is for suckers and you actually can't change?
That's what I thought for a second. I thought they were going to go that transgressive route, but no, that would have been too much.
Like the fact that he does kill Hotshot at the end, there's something monstrous and scary about that in the same way as his like sexual impulses. So are we just gonna keep doing this? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's a cool sequence.
Yeah.
The coolest sequence in the movie, I think, by far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some good musical sequences. I loved when Mammy was putting all the little kids on her lap and singing each one a lullaby, and then they'd pass them off into bed. That was so cute. It actually reminded me of my grandma. So.
I love that.
Also, the field church service where he's doing like the soft shoe like train, like track chugging. That's so cool. That was cool.
Yeah, super, super cool. And even just, we mentioned obviously the sequence where they're in the underground dance hall and they're going through the Swanee Shuffle and how to do this dance. Just having that be like a pretty accurate representation of the roots of classical jazz and in that time period, whereas Hollywood usually like sanitizes it a lot more, was just cool, you know, to see this kind of seedy dance hall with gambling and stuff, but it seemed like a good time.
For folks that enjoyed the new film Sinners, if you're listening to this on time, if you're listening to it a year later, last year's film Sinners, you will see that theme of music being that connective tissue through the Black experience kind of really hit on here, which again, stereotypical somewhat, but I think a lot of truth there too.
Yeah, no, I think they took great care to actually have the music be as authentic as possible. There were a couple of parts where instead of the fully authentic representation of Black entertainment and religious music, they went into a bit of like Irving Berlin style, which is a little bit more like Europeanized. Is that a word? Like different
Honky,
arrangements, but
might be the word you're looking for.
but like such a big chunk of the movie just had genuine good music, both on the spiritual side and the more like jazz side, and just reflecting again, this is 1929 and it'll be up until about the time of Alexander's Ragtime Band where we start seeing some of this hit the mainstream a bit more, like influence the mainstream, but it's like literally 10 years later.
That movie fucking sucked.
I know, that movie was terrible. But yeah, in terms of also the performances, but also the talent, like singing style, Nina Mae McKinney, wonderful singing voice. Just, I was like, I could have a record of hers or something and just listen to that. Because I know Nina Mae McKinney went on to do some tours. Like she was both a musician and an actress. Daniel Haynes, I don't think really was. He just acted a bit and then retired. And he actually did become a full-time Baptist minister. So maybe he was like, you know what? It worked for my character. Let me go do this. Baby. But his voice also was so wonderful to listen to. Yeah. And they even make a point of like the characters comment on it, right? Of just like, man, no one sings like you. Yeah. Very warm, very, very comforting. Fantastic voice. Reminding ourselves that like 1929, in terms of viewing this too as a musical, reminder that we've been seeing the Broadway Melody, Hollywood Review, later 42nd Street, where this movie still does treat all of the musical numbers as diegetic, but I do feel like it is a little bit closer to The Wizard of Oz, where you're seeing other things going on in the world around them while they're singing, and sometimes the songs match up to whatever the kind of theme or tone that we're supposed to be taking from it, especially in his going home sequence, which is like that montage of him going home, and that felt much more similar to being more of a like Wizard of Oz predecessor than all of the other musicals that we saw before then. So I just wanted to shout that out.
Stop and watch.
Yeah, I have a suspicion. I think the part of that is this concept of like music being very much like present in Black American life. And so something where you could have it be diegetic or have people literally singing about what's happening to them and it not being a weird like departure from reality versus.
Yeah, I guess
so maybe
that's true.
we're being ignorant by thinking that it looks natural. When in reality, if you asked a black viewer from that time, it'd be like, I have never sang in my life.
I mean, I wasn't saying it looked natural. I was saying it's more like the musicals that I like, which is more integrated into, you know.
No, I agree.
But yeah, no, that is a very good point. Because, yeah, you're right. In, I guess, white culture at the time, it's like, no, you sing in musical numbers at dance halls. And like, that's when you sing. So yeah, that makes sense that the other musicals we've seen treated it very much more like that type of Hollywood review
hips
sort of
still,
thing.
young man.
But speaking of, maybe that's a good segue into talking about the religiosity of this movie.
Okay.